Welcome to MK Miniature Studio. Thanks for joining. Start off by base coating the armor panels following the contours of the zenithal highlight. So we're doing the darker paint in the shadows and the lighter paint where the white parts are. To create a zenithal highlight, all you need to do is prime the model black and then spray white primer or light gray from the top of the model where you think the light will be hitting it. Now I'm applying the mid-tone to create the initial highlight. We want to build contrast between the light and the shaded areas to get the non-metallic metal look. If you missed how to do the blue parts of this model, check out my Twitch channel, MK Miniatures, and watch the live video. Applying a shade saves a massive amount of time compared to pinlining every single gap in the armor plates. So far, I've been using an old, beat-up army painter brush, which I believe is the standard regiment size, and I was doing all the base coating and washes with this brush. It's really about just getting paint on the model and not worrying about the details at this point. When you apply your wash, you want to make sure that it doesn't tint your highlighted areas too dark. So once you cover the entire area, clean your brush off and then wick away any excess that might be on the flat areas. One way to speed up your painting is by painting other areas of the model while the wet area is dry. Bouncing back and forth with different paints on your wet palette will help you be a lot more dynamic and flexible when you're painting your miniatures. Again, we're taking advantage of the zenithal highlight to build up the white and gray areas of the armor. Don't be afraid to mix your paint to get the desired shade that you want. Here I start blocking out the lines of the armor with a mixture of black and gray to make contrast. And I'm using a Winsor & Newton Series 7 brush, size 1. I like the size 1 because it gives you a really nice tip and it allows you to hold enough paint. One thing to notice here as I'm doing this straight line is how my hands are braced on each other. So I pretty much have my hand and arms braced on the table, and then I brace my hands together to kind of lock them in to really stabilize things. And that's a really good way to help with the precision painting part. One thing I've noticed when using white paints or light grays is that they tend to be a little bit more chalky than like blues or reds. So you really want to make sure you have enough moisture. It should probably be like a 1% milk consistency. One thing that's great about using a wet palette is it allows you to go back and forth between the different shades of your color. So as you build up your highlights, you can fix mistakes and go into the shadows as you see fit. So as you can see here, I'm going back and forth between the medium to darker gray and the light gray to block out the colors and shapes that I want. Whenever you're putting paint on the model, you want to make sure that you have the right amount of paint on the tip of your brush and the right consistency. Now that our wash is dry, let's get back to painting the gold. Here I'm working on the next layer of highlight. I'm using ice yellow, and what I try to do is see where the light is hitting the part of the arm where it's the brightest. And if you shine a lamp on it or you play around with your flashlight on your phone or something like that, it'll give you a natural line to follow. And you can pretty much put it anywhere you think it would look natural. Ice yellow is another color that seems to dry fairly fast for me and has a little bit of a chalky consistency. So make sure that you have plenty of moisture on your wet palette and it's not drying out on your brush. Now let's put a line on the backside of the arm. Because frankly, if you're playing this game, you're probably going to be looking at the back of your models quite often, since you're having them facing your opponent. So I like to have another light source if you're looking at the back of the model. For this stage, I'm mainly using the side of the brush to get a line highlight. So here I am mixing some black with some royal purple to create a shade color for the recesses and lines of the armor. And this is where we're going to start building up the main part of our contrast. can't recommend a wet palette enough because it allows you to go back and forth between your colors. So if you make a mistake or if you just want to touch something up here and there, you can just go back and forth and it saves you a ton of time. Alright, let's talk about glazing. So what glazing is trying to make a very thin transparent layer of paint that shows the paint through underneath it. So we're not trying to get coverage here, we're trying to kind of tint the paint color. Before I put the glaze on the model, I usually like to test it on my hand or on a piece of paper or something to make sure that it's not too thick and it's not too runny. Because remember, we're not trying to do a wash here, we're just trying to tint what's under the paint. You can make a glaze by adding water or using a glaze medium that's available from various companies. Another easy way to glaze is to buy a pre-made product, whether it's called a glaze or you can also use inks. Inks are transparent, and so you can use them through an airbrush for object source lighting or things like that. But the whole point of it is to make sure that whatever color you're using shows the color that's underneath it. Here I went back in to work on the shading and the lines in the armor to make sure that I had plenty of contrast and that my glaze didn't brighten up where I wanted the deep dark areas too much. Here I decided to go in and add more highlights using the ice yellow. So what's great about the wet palette is you can kind of go back and forth between the colors and really work on the model more organically versus trying to complete one entire step first, more static. Next, we're just going to apply another layer of wash in the recesses or on the underside of where we want more shadow. It's another quick, easy way to create contrast and make sure you have the color that you want. It's very similar to glazing because we're not wanting to have it pull too much in the recesses. We're kind of just tinting and shading to a darker color. Back to glazing the gold and yellow to make our highlights even brighter. When you're glazing, you really want to make sure that you're applying a very thin coat, and it typically takes a couple thin glazes to get the desired result. Now we're using pure white to really create the brightest areas and to have the most contrast between that and the purplish black color. And so I like to call it icing sometimes because it's kind of like the icing on the cake. So at this point, I start going back to the glaze to tone down the white a little bit and to create a smooth transition between the gold and the white highlights. Again, I'm going back to the glaze to tone down the white and to create a smoother transition. Here I'm just tidying things up along the way by completing more shading in the panel lines of the armor. In this section of the video, I'm using some ink, as I mentioned before, to glaze the eyes to make them yellow. So I started with white as an undercoat, and I'm going to apply the ink in a very thin layer to make the eyes yellow.